I was detained by the police for selling soap while people around me were being arrested, but the couple next to me were clearly setting up a soap table in my vicinity, and I was told that I was going with them. Stay tuned. I'm going to tell you all about this. Okay, I saw something this weekend that was absolutely rattling, and I know that it is because this has happened to me. And as I was going home, it occurred to me that everyone who sells soap as a small business probably should know about this. Now, this weekend, two people at a market where I live in New England were arrested in front of my eyes for their soap table setup. And what had happened to these people as I was watching the scene unfold was the exact same mistake that I made about 10 years ago. That got me into some trouble, which I thought at the time, being so naive into going out into the world and selling things in an open market, I thought at the time was kind of a fluke one-off kind of an experience. But now that I've seen it happen to me again, I realize I probably should have talked about this a long time ago. Now, I'm not going to tell you what happened to these people because it was pretty scary. It was really hard to watch. Both the police and the vendors were absolutely horrible, and it ended up becoming a big scene, and there were kids involved, and I don't even want to talk about something that might expose people like this, since I'm a third-party observer and I don't really know all the details. I just know what I saw. But I did watch it, and it was basically the same exact thing that happened to me. So as soon as I saw that the vendor was confused and that he was evidently talking to a plainclothes policeman, I was thinking, oh no, these guys have no idea what's about to happen. So I'm going to describe my experience so that you know exactly where I made my mistake and let you know how that worked out so that it doesn't happen to you. So this was about 10 years ago, and I was just setting up my table at a huge New England flea market with my next door neighbor. And I was selling my handmade soap along with a couple of body butters that I had made. And she was doing some face painting for children. And we were working right out of the same tent. We had driven together and come in together. And we had two little tables set up side by side. And I was approached by the very first customer of the morning as soon as I set up my table. It was just the break of dawn. And he came up to my table and he said, "Oh, you're selling soap." And I said, "Yep, good morning." And he said to me, "Do you have anything for a rash?" And the first thing out of my mouth was, "No, this is just soap. What do you mean a rash? What kind of rash?" And he said, "Oh, I don't know, something for a rash." And he did a little wiggle. So I said to him, "Well, if you don't think you need a doctor, then probably anything that you might want to look at would actually be in a pharmacy, but probably not a place like this." Now, keep in mind, the market that I was at was not a quaint little artistic farmer's market with organic rich people trinkets. This was a giant, massive flea market where people come with all sorts of exotic things, sometimes antiques, sometimes garbage, and sometimes they're handmade things. This is a big, just giant bazaar. So he shook his head and he seemed to agree with me, and he said, "Yeah, that's probably true." And then he leaned in and he bought a few bars of soap, and he said that he'd just try this soap anyway. And the day went on, and the sales, they came and they went. And the market was starting to kind of drift off. These markets tend to shut down around 2:30. So it's about 1:30 and the sun's coming out. It's super hot out in the middle of August, I think it was at the time. And there are fewer people. And the man makes his way back to my table. And he came up with a completely different tone of voice and a different personality. And he introduced himself as a plainclothes cop who was working for the Department of Consumer Protection for the state, and he asked me if I had a permit. So I said yes, and I shuffled around looking for my permit, and I pulled it out, and I showed my permit, and he looked at it, and he started typing on his phone, and he was going through some information. Now, keep in mind, at this time, setting up a soap table on a Sunday afternoon was sort of my market hobby. I already own a retail store that has nothing to do with soap. During this time period, I already own a very large retail store, and I'm completely knowledgeable about needing permits and what I have to have. This was just something that I was doing on the side. So I did have my permit available, and I gave it to him, and he handed it back to me, and he said, "No, do you have a business registered with a permit?" And I said, yes, this is my business name right here, and this is the permit that I was told that I needed when I called the Department of Revenue at the state. And then he went on to explain that I needed another permit for selling my products. And I was completely confused. So I asked, for selling soap, what other permit do I need? And he said, no, not for the soap, but for the lotion. Now on my table, I had about 500 bars of soap. And I had 3 8-ounce bottles of lotion. It was actually an oil-based body butter, which was left over from a batch that I had made as a gift. And I took the remaining 32 ounces, I bottled it up, and I put it on the table with my soap. Now, I had just started making lotion, and I had no idea back then that lotion was classified completely differently and that the state required that I have a permit just for those 3 bottles. So I explained that I had only had the permit that I knew about and that I had never run across these rules before because I really never sold any of my whipped oils before, and I was really just there for my soaps. And he said, okay, and he shook his head. And he said, well, you can't sell this lotion unless you have a permit. And I said, okay, so should I just take him off the table and then maybe put him back in my car? And he said, yeah, you can do that. And then he went on to explain all the rules that I needed to follow and gave me some printed papers that I could go and find this information online. Now, if you're a seasoned cosmetic maker, you know the difference between, hopefully or typically, but if you're new, you might not know. You probably know the difference between selling soaps and cosmetics and how they're classified. And this is a lot of the information and education that you get as you move over into selling things that are not soap. But at this stage, when I was only making soap for so long, I didn't know that these 2 things were classified differently. So he explained everything to me, and he showed me some information on where to find resources and all the information that I needed to follow through with if I wanted to continue to sell my soap, if I wanted to continue to sell my lotions, but my soap was perfectly fine. So I said, okay, I'll do that. And I did what he said, and I took the lotion off the table. Now, I hadn't sold any of it. There were only 3 bottles, and those 3 bottles went right back into my car. And he stood there and he talked to me for about 40 minutes. And then he kind of seemed happy with our interaction, and he moved on. Now, of course, this messed up all my sales in the last part of that day because I had to be engaged in the conversation with him, and people were listening in, and they kind of were moving away and starting to avoid me. And then this is where it gets scary. Now, at this giant market, you park your car on a plot of land. And none of these cars leave that little plot that you've rented out until the day is over at a specific time, because there are thousands of people, sometimes up to 20,000 people in a day, who are walking through the little corridors that are set up for the vendors. And during this time, no cars move around. So you're trapped in this space. Of course, you agree to this when you sign up, but you're trapped in this space until a certain time period, and then everyone's free to pack up and leave. So right around this time period, an announcement comes over the speaker identifying a handful of license plates and cars that are not allowed to leave per the police. Now, I had never seen this before, and my car was one of these identified, and I was not allowed to leave until the entire place cleared out, and then the announcement over the loudspeaker asked all of us to come up to the main office. And so I walked up there, having no clue as to what was going on. And when I got up there, people were being addressed individually, some of them harshly, about being caught selling things that were obvious contraband, like old knives and antiques that were too much like weapons. And a cop who was dressed like a uniformed police officer, dressed like a supervisor, said that everyone in the room was going to be arrested. And just right around this time, there was a young Middle Eastern couple who were being told that they were absolutely under arrest for telling the same plainclothes cop that they had some special creams for his supposed rash, and they also had no permit for selling lotions, and they were making, ridiculous medicinal claims. Now, these vendors were rabid. They were so angry. They were shouting and spitting and denying it, and I don't know what these people were trying to sell or what they offered to the cop. Let's be clear. They did have a lotion table set up, but I don't know what it was that they said that actually got them in trouble. But those people were arrested right in front of my eyes. And then the same cop, the one who was dressed like a supervisor, turned to me and he said the same thing. You're not supposed to be telling people that you have medicine, and you do not have a permit to sell what you have. And I immediately started shaking my head, and I said, no, I don't have any kind of medicine. I don't have skin medicine. But the previous people were also denying everything that they were being told that they had done. So why would I be telling the truth? Or I'm so confused at this point. And I was mortified and I was scared. And right around that time, the original cop, the one who was in his plain clothes, the one who had spent almost an hour talking to me, redirected his attention from what he was doing, and he turned and he said, "No, she's a different one." And then the supervisor just looked square at me and said, "Okay, then just wait." Just matter-of-factly. So you can imagine, I'm shaking like a leaf. 5 minutes felt like an hour. And then finally, the original cop came over to me and he said, "I know that looked really harsh, but these people get caught all the time and they don't care." So evidently, the interaction that I had seen, there was some sort of history with these people getting arrested in the past, and there was some sort of history with them maybe doing something illicit, and they all sort of knew each other. I did not know the backstory on that. I just saw people getting arrested, and then the attention was directed at me, and I was being accused of the same thing, and it was absolutely mortifying. So all I could answer was just, "Oh, that's it. Oh." So he said to me, "The reason I had you come up here is because you are going to go home, but I'm just going to have you sign this piece of paper that says I've given you this information. So you're not in trouble today, but if you don't have the right permit the next time and somebody asks you, they can look up your business name and they can see that you've been told specifically by us that you need to have a permit." So suddenly my lungs started working again and I could feel my legs, and every other person who was in that building who was called to the office had to stay with the police. So I don't know exactly the details of what happened to those people. I was allowed to leave, get in my car, and as you can imagine, after that kind of an adrenaline for an old grandma to go through on a Sunday afternoon, I went home and I went straight to sleep. I had to sleep for the rest of the day because I was scared into exhaustion. Now, the following week, when I went back to the market with my soap, which does not need any special permit, the market staff was super rude to me and acted like I was some unwanted stepkid, so no love lost there. And so how can you make sure that this never happens to you? Well, the tricky part is the rules for licenses and permits vary depending on what state you live in. There are two types of permits for your soaps and cosmetics. A reseller permit is a sales tax permit that the Department of Revenue in your state will grant. Now, not all states have sales tax, so you may not need this. And if your state does have sales tax, personal care items may not be taxable, so you may need the permit, but you may collect zero sales tax. Now, a completely different type of permit is one that might be issued from a Department of Agriculture or Consumer Protection or another agency from any other state that may give you approval on the quality of your product or basically an inspection on your workspace. And this also varies by state, and it could apply to only soap or only cosmetics or both or neither. And so you have to find out from your state website. So what happens if you don't follow these laws? Well, I can't tell you how strictly anything is regulated anywhere, and it's entirely possible that strictness changes with times, but clearly in New England, sometimes some people do have legal problems, both 10 years ago and now. So make sure that you do your due diligence and you know what the rules are when you go out to sell your handcrafted items. Now, if you're still listening to this and you are familiar with the map that I've published inside the Soapmakers course, for the members who come and go out of those web pages all the time, sometime in 2018, I posted a map that would bring you to all the states and the regulations and the permits that were needed just for your convenience, so you could get easy access to that information. I just wanted to make a note that I have just looked up all the information pertaining to each state to see if there are any changes that have been made recently or in the post-pandemic situation where anything might have been updated or changed or moved. So if you are a member over there, you can go directly to that map in lesson 9.1 and then click on your region and get the summary of what is required. Now, this is based on information that I've both found online and phone calls that I made to agencies, in some case asking for clarification. Now, I've published this to hopefully make your research much easier, but if you are not a member over at cottagediy.com and you don't use that as a resource, then what you want to do is go straight to your state.gov website. And I would say look for Department of Revenue first. That's a good place to start, and find out if you need a sales tax permit. Also, make sure to check your local laws. Nothing here is legal advice. I just want to throw that in as a reminder. I'm just telling you what my experience has been in some of the mistakes that I've made in the past when I was new to all this information, and where you can go to find resources to get more information that will help you. So at the end of the day, it did have an okay, peaceful ending and a hard-learned lesson. I'll see you guys in the next video.